This video is brought to you by Campfire Blaze. Click on the link in my description and use the code SZ21 to get 20% off all lifetime purchases of Blaze modules for all of 2021. There's just something about cooking shows that's hard to really explain. If you're someone who's never really watched one, then you might not really get it. After all, what makes them so different from the millions of other reality shows out there? And on the surface, yeah, that's true, but there's just something about cooking shows that lets me get into a place of total zen. I think it has something to do with the basic concept of food. It's a universal connector. Even if we aren't familiar with certain dishes because, like my co-writer Emily, we grew up in sheltered households and never had bread until we were 19, we're able to understand what makes food good and what makes food food. And the process of actually making it is fascinating. There's lots of science and art that goes into something as simple as making a cookie correctly. That alone can make for compelling enough TV, enough for there to be programs that are just people explaining how to cook stuff to you. But sometimes you want more than that, right? Like, recipes and how-tos are fine, but what about when you want something with stakes, tension, laughs, tears? Well, that's where you get into the world of cooking competition shows, of which there are a lot. These can be relatively simple affairs. Things like Chopped or Great British Bake Off are fairly chill and focus mostly on just testing the skills of the contestants and seeing who can be the best cook under the intense pressure of television cameras and high-stakes prizes. That's where you get the fun stuff. Things like Hell's Kitchen, which preys off of the concept of anxiety and disappointing, angry paternal figures, can be stressful to watch, but also amusing. Stuff like Cutthroat Kitchen, where 4 chefs compete to make a dish while also dealing with potential sabotages given to them by the other chefs, is, pardon the gesture I'm about to do, but perfect. It's just so fun and chill. You can get some really weird stuff, like having to cook an entire meal using golf clubs as your utensils, or having to make a dish while wearing lobster hands. It's a relaxing time. And so that's what I was doing, showing Cutthroat Kitchen to my co-writer Emily, who had never seen the show before, trying to take our minds off of the, you know, everything that had been happening, when we saw an interesting program come up on the recommended list, something called Crime Scene Kitchen. This caught us off guard because we hadn't heard of it and the name was, well, Crime Scene Kitchen, so we went ahead and put on the first episode and sort of fell in love with it. And it was this gradual realization that this is definitely what the next video was gonna be, wasn't it? Like, we have to talk about it, let people know exactly what this show is, how it works, and how it's so disappointing while also kind of being everything we hoped it could be. So before I go more into this video, I do want to give you some idea of what to expect, which is essentially that 3 months ago I did a video that was not remotely intended to be anything controversial or divisive, just pretty simply recapping Homestuck, and immediately got a legal threat from it. And then the month after that, I did a ridiculously long video that went into some controversies with internet personalities, and it also ended up being a bit divisive. And then last month, I made a video about the aforementioned legal threats, which is, you know, stressful. Though you can still get this young, dumb, and full of libel mug at the merch link in my description if you want. Mine's coming in soon and I'm very excited. And given that next month's video is probably going to touch on some pretty controversial topics as well, I would, 1, not like to be defined solely by controversy and drama, and 2, would like a break from videos that are kind of exhausting to release to just chill and vibe a bit, even if no one ends up watching this. So if you're watching this video, don't expect any massive revelations or hot takes. Rather, I found a show about 2 topics I like a lot that's very weird in a kind of delightful way, and I just want to vibe and take you on that journey with me. So without further ado, let's talk about Crime Scene Kitchen. So Crime Scene Kitchen started this past May and had its season 1 finale about a week ago. It's hosted by Joel McHale, best known for delivering snarky comments on The Soup, playing himself on Community, and playing himself in that weird forgotten sitcom with Stephen Fry about why millennials are bad and oversensitive and hate the outdoors.
Young adults today are a very delicate group. We offer an entire class on how to deal with that.
Oh, is the class called I Was Born in the 90s Wah?
The premise premise of Crime Scene Kitchen is that it essentially blends two topics that people have become increasingly invested in during quarantine: baking and true crime. The show's primary challenge is that teams of two enter a kitchen where some kind of dessert has recently been baked, and they have about a minute or so to figure out, based on the kitchen leftovers, what kind of dessert it was, and spend several hours recreating it for the judges. Celebrity chef Curtis Stone, who runs a Michelin-starred restaurant in LA and appears on a whole bunch of Food Network shows, and YouTuber Yolanda Gamp, who runs the baking channel How to Cake It and creates a lot of elaborately designed cakes. The crime element largely comes through in the branding. They describe the used kitchen as a crime scene, the contestants are referred to as dessert detectives, and the illustrations of how their desserts are supposed to look are essentially branded like crime scene sketches. That's mostly it as far as true crime related content on the show goes, which is interesting because the crime angle is really integral to how they brand themselves. I'll talk more about that later. Each episode is comprised of two different challenges. There's the dessert round mini challenge, where the contestants are usually recreating a moderately simple dessert, and then the elimination showpiece round, which is also a dessert round, so I don't know why the rounds were named this way, but takes more time and usually involves a more technically challenging dessert, like macaron or a croque-en-bouche. The dessert rounds also tend to incorporate celebrity judges like Ken Jeong or Kelly Osbourne, whose apparent personal favorite desserts are the subject of that round. At the end of each round, a moving platform that's for some reason called the Confectinator 3000 reveals the dish, and one of the judges explains how the clues should have led the chefs to the right answer in true parlor scene fashion. The team who won the dessert round gets an extra clue when investigating their crime scene kitchen, which virtually always means that the team who won the first round will also win the second round. Victories and eliminations are based on accuracy first and foremost, and then the taste and presentation of the dessert second. That is to say, if you incorrectly guessed what you were supposed to make, no matter how good it is, there's a very good chance you're going home. Conversely, it doesn't really matter how badly you mess up your dessert if you get the dessert type right. As long as at least one other team got it wrong, you're safe. Obviously, if multiple people got the correct dessert, it still matters how yours looks and tastes, but that's secondary to doing good detective work. This leads to a lot of interesting outcomes that we'll look at later. Joel McHale's role on the show is interesting. As best as I can tell, he mostly serves as the Deadpool of the competition. Sometimes it seems like he's taking the show pretty seriously and is invested in the lives of the contestants. Other times he's sarcastically taking pot shots at the show and its general existence and at Curtis Stone.
Is there any show I won't host?
Basically, he's being Joel McHale. So, episode 1 begins with the contestants being brought into the crime scene kitchen. The setup essentially has them all cooking in their own little mini kitchens, which are all color-coded and stocked with some very cute cookware that I don't think they ever use, and seems to mostly serve the purpose of making the set look distinctive and nice. We get introduced to 6 teams of 2. Only some of them get any real focus. There are people who the show barely even really acknowledges are there. Among the more interesting cast of characters are Nathan and Anthony, who are 2 bakers who are also bros. They're just bros being bakers. They're very clear that they are bakers and they are also bros. We also meet Jay and Twee, friends from culinary school. It's very funny because most of the friend couples get described as best friends, and then some of them only get described as friends, which is just great to me. Luis and Natalie are another team to watch out for, both because they also fit the aforementioned friends description and because Natalie's style is fantastic. Aaron and Amanda are military veterans, which is their entire brand to the point of wearing camo in every episode. And then there's my personal favorites, mother-son duo Cathy and Thomas. They're very clearly serious about doing well and are very clearly threats. They're great and I love them. Also, Thomas has a bit of history on reality shows, having once been a contestant on Chopped Sweets, the dessert spin-off of popular cooking series Chopped, and having actually won it. He describes himself as a perfectionist in this ABC interview I found with him, where the writer just obviously didn't proofread their own writing, as the quote says verbatim.
I'm very much a perfectionist. When you're on a show like this, the signature is ticking. The odds are stacked against us.
It's just hilarious to me. Best team on the show. The judges are, well, they're cooking show judges. Not being super distinctive, but essentially doing their jobs pretty well and delivering the kind of baseline comments on the food that you'd expect. Noticing when it looks nice and saying it tastes good. They don't have that many individual insights to offer, which makes me think these judges weren't specifically sought out as unique additions to the cast, but rather that pretty much anyone with some culinary knowledge would have worked here. Neither of the two judges have any real connection to true crime or mystery elements that I can find either. That being said, restaurateur Curtis Stone's run on the show is just very unintentionally funny for some reason. Some of it is just the fact that he always kind of seems like he's not supposed to be there, or like he just rolled out of bed and remembered he had to host a game show. Like, he doesn't seem to comb his hair and always seems vaguely nonplussed about the whole thing. He just aimlessly walks around the set like the guy at a party who doesn't know anybody. Also, Joel McHale and the other contestants are just constantly making little jokes at Curtis's expense. At one point after being eliminated, one of the contestants just confusedly remarks that she doesn't know who he is. I don't know, it's just amazing.
Thankfully, we didn't kill Curtis Stone.
Who is Curtis Stone?
The first episode dessert challenge is pretty straightforward, with us getting a general sense of how these people go about the challenge. There's some evidence to suggest the dessert is some kind of a pie or tart, with pie tins and cake pans sitting around and little bits of chocolate and eggs all over. We also get the first hint that red herring clues are going to be included, like some raspberries in the fridge that are unopened. Two teams, Thomas and Cathy and Jane Twee, make a Boston cream pie, and Thomas and Cathy end up winning the extra clue on the basis of theirs being a little bit nicer. The second round makes it pretty obvious that the dessert is some sort of carrot cake with carrots in a grater, and almost every team makes one, only two teams making something else instead. The main differentiation here to determine the winners is therefore taste and whether the cake is decorated accurately. Thomas and Cathy, having won the mini challenge, get the extra clue of realizing the cake's been scraped in a certain way.
Such a little detective. This tells me it might be a naked cake. Because if we were icing the entire cake, all the sides, and we swiped it, then this whole thing would be cream cheese frosting.
As a result, their cake is the closest, and their team is chosen as the top dessert detectives. There's no prize for winning, but it establishes them as threats right off the bat, which is good because the pair is out for blood. We also tragically see the elimination of the Baker Bros, the bros who are also bakers. And then Joel says this.
Because next week, 6 more teams will enter the crime scene kitchen hoping to challenge you for the prize. That is gonna do it for us tonight. Good night, everyone.
Wait, what the fuck? I love this because there was never any mention beforehand that this was the premise. No, and next week we'll meet the other tribe on this island announcement at the beginning. It's kind of framed like a twist with its mention at the end, but it's said so offhandedly that I'm not even really sure that it is one. It kind of makes it seem like they just forgot to mention that this was only half of the entire cast, which is absolutely incredible. So we meet our second half of the cast in episode 2, and they're by and large not super memorable. It's largely because the first half of the cast all kind of had a strongly branded thing. Like, they're the bros, or they're the military veterans, or they will destroy anybody who gets in their way. Like, they feel like anime archetypes. But in this episode, they tend to just be friends, mostly. Not really that much distinctive stuff is said about them right off the bat, so none of the teams are really that memorable, at least not initially. The only team really worth taking note of are mother-daughter duo Leslie and Emma, who I would describe as the Group B counterpart to Cathy and Thomas. They're worth taking note of both because for about half a second I thought Emma was Maggie Mayfish, and because they very clearly want to win. There are some indicators that Emma in particular is very much a perfectionist, getting very stressed when things go wrong, but also demonstrating a really great attention to detail. Also, after doing a bit more digging into the contestants later on, we found out that Emma is a weightlifter and is super buff, which you can't tell by watching the show, but is rad as hell. There's also one person whose whole thing is that they're Italian because it's a cooking show, and so you have to have an Italian American who makes it their whole thing. And finally, there's another mother-daughter team named Rebecca and Jean who bring this delightfully uncomfortable energy to the show. Pretty much any time the pair is on screen, they're arguing, and it's in a way where the show very much wants you to find it entertaining. The music playing is rarely tense, oh no, shit's getting bad music, but just a regular fun backing track. I don't know, the editing cues very much suggest that nothing's wrong, which just gets very weird and uncomfortable when every moment they're on screen you get stuff like this.
There's nothing in this. There's a coffee cup, but there really...
Nope. You better get it back in there.
Thank God I didn't put that on your head.
Also, they use raw egg during their baking at one point and get called out for it.
A whole egg? Raw. I didn't think about that till right now.
Raw egg could turn into salmonella.
The first challenge dessert is a cannoli, which everyone gets except the Italian-American team.
Could it possibly be cannolis?
No, there wasn't a cannoli shell. There was nothing. There's no way.
I'm Italian. I grew up in an Italian household. If I saw Italian ingredients for an Italian dessert, I would know.
Lori and Jason, who we so far know very little about except that they're dating and they're from Tennessee, make the best cannolis and get an extra clue for round 2. A whole bunch of clues suggest it could be some kind of cake with chocolate in it, and a few other clues like kirsch that only a couple teams notice. Lori and Jason get the clue of chocolate bark as a reward for winning the dessert round, and the dessert turns out to be a Black Forest cake, which 2 teams got. The winning team ends up being Leslie and Emma, establishing them as the team to beat in this group. And then we go back to the first half of the cast for episode 3, which, thank God, I missed them. The next few episodes mostly follow that same basic formula. There's a little introduction segment, the teams go into the crime scene kitchen / sci-fi holding cell one by one, sometimes to recreate a regular mystery dessert and sometimes to recreate a celebrity's favorite mystery dessert. The judges judge, whoever gets it the most right and tasting the best wins an extra advantage. When they repeat the process with something a bit harder, someone goes home. For the next 4 episodes, they alternate between the A cast and the B cast, the episodes whittling each set of teams down until there are 3 teams left in each one, enough for them to later merge Survivor style. For the most part, the actual format of baking the desserts is pretty much the same, so there's not much of a point in recapping every single one in exact detail. It's also generally pretty obvious from the very beginning of each episode airing exactly who's going to go home that week. A lot of teams get absolutely zero focus until they suddenly suspiciously start to feature more and more in confessionals that episode, or you get the slightest sliver of their backstory when you haven't gotten anyone else's, and it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that they're going to go home.
When I was 17, I interned there and I got hired immediately, and I worked there for over 4.5 years.
Hope and Shania, your pie was incorrect in the dessert round.
That being said, there are a few interesting elements that crop up in these rounds. Firstly, Rebecca and Jean continue to have just weird arguments in every single scene they're in, which is just great in a deeply uncomfortable way. Very much gives me the same energy as playing a game of Facade and being at a dinner party with a couple whose marriage is failing. It keeps being edited as this quirky, weird thing, which gets interesting. A side note, but after these 2 are eventually eliminated for not identifying a coquembouche, my co-writer Emily and I went to their Instagram, and someone actually made an Instagram account with 167 followers called Bring Back Rebecca and Jean, who comments on all their stuff and posts what look like professional promos for Crime Scene Kitchen. I'm assuming one of the ladies runs this account themselves, but I kind of hope it's just some huge Rebecca and Jean stan, or like Joe McHale himself. Rebecca and Jean themselves seem to be making TikToks about their pie shop and their tenure on the show nowadays, so good for them. Cathy and Thomas continue to do well in the challenges, guessing the correct dessert pretty much every time. They get a really interesting edit here in general. Part of the time, it seems like they're the protagonists, like we're expected to root for and identify with them. But sometimes they very much get this almost villain edit, whether it's playing villainous sounding music when they're cooking or just cutting to them making various interesting facial expressions during other contestants' judgings. As I'll talk about more later, the teams on this show don't really interact with each other like at all, so those micro interactions and the very occasional camera confessionals are really all we have to go off of when it comes to how these contestants view each other. Weirdly enough, the moments where they're setting Cathy and Thomas up as these like cutthroat sociopaths makes me like them even more. I don't know, they style Thomas like those ski movie villain greyhounds from that one tweet and have the other contestants whisper to each other during judging about how those 2 are the threats to beat, and it makes me think they deserve the world. I I love them. Team sociopaths for life.
I'm committed to coming out on top next time. Just cannot mess this up.
No, we cannot mess this up.
On top of Cathy and Thomas in the A team and Leslie and Emma in the B team, friends Natalie and Luis pretty quickly established themselves as a team to beat as well, winning the next episode they're in and pretty consistently making delicious and pretty desserts. As with the other teams, we learn very little about their actual backstories, at least at this point, beyond the way they relate to one another on the actual show. This is partly because the tone of Crime Scene Kitchen at this point is pretty irreverent. Joel McHale seems to be there mostly to kind of just mock the premise of the show most of the time. Curtis Stone explains the rules to the audience like 5 times in every single episode, seemingly in case you just turned it on mid-episode or are only half paying attention to the very simple premise of you go home if you get the dessert wrong. At least at the start, it doesn't seem like it's taking itself that seriously. So at this point, all we really know about any of these people is the way they interact on the show. Thomas does tell Kelly Osbourne that he used to be such a huge stan of hers that his entire bedroom was pictures of her, which is humanizing, but in such a hilarious way. I love it. Some of the clues and moments end up being pretty funny. There's a tin of cocoa in one of the challenges that the contestants were only supposed to realize was a red herring because the expiry date was all the way back in the 80s. 2 of the contestants make an apple pie at one point in the dessert round, and let me state that I have no idea how the fuck they managed this, ended up making a fucking soup. Like, it's just a little bit of pastry in an apple pie broth, and the soup boys don't go home. It's amazing. At one point, someone makes a croquembouche that completely falls off the cone, and so it's just like a cone with 2 cream puffs stuck to it. There's a very tacky 4th of July challenge where all the cakes are American flags, and they're all so ugly, and I love them so much. That week, they make the clues extra easy to make sure that everyone gets that it's supposed to be an America cake, presumably so not even one team manages to get out of respecting the great nation of the US of A. God bless. There are also several different challenges where just no one gets the dessert. So, okay, midway through the competition, the judges realized the challenges were way too easy. Like, most of the time, almost everyone guesses the dessert except for 1 or 2 teams. So they straight up tell us on the show that they've accordingly upped the difficulty of the challenges, and then immediately we start getting a bunch of challenges where just nobody gets it. Like, immediately after they tell us this, there's a dessert round where the dessert is apparently a mango cheesecake, and 3 different teams got a mango tart and no one got cheesecake, so they just don't give anyone an extra clue. And then next episode, the main challenge is some kind of Christmas-themed gingerbread dessert, and some people do a spice cake and some people do a gingerbread cake, but no one gets that it's supposed to be a 2-tiered spiced ginger cake, so they just don't declare a winner for that episode. But they do it in the funniest way. They say no one gets the title of top dessert detective, but here are the 2 teams who did the best job. Except because the title of top dessert detective doesn't give you anything, that ends up being functional the exact same as declaring you the winner. It'd be like if you wanted to be a Jedi Master and they said no, but they still put you on the Jedi Council. Then the merge happens, which actually goes forward with very little fanfare considering how much the judges and host hyped it up. At this point, the military vets, Cathy and Thomas, Leslie and Emma, Luis and Natalie, and the Tennessee couple are still in it, as well as a couple other teams who get very little focus from the show. There are a couple brief moments where the teams are like, ooh, new competitors, but since the teams don't really interact and are all sequestered off in their own little Pinterest kitchens, it doesn't end up affecting the competition that much, except that we're now no longer alternating casts each episode. The quarterfinals have a little bit of drama in them, with Luis accidentally turning the oven off without realizing and the team having to scramble to fix their bake. Natalie apparently wasn't feeling well and isn't there for the judging, but the team luckily ends up recovering pretty well. Also, the only piece of actual game-related detective work happens in this episode, and it's honestly kind of amazing. Because, like I said, the contestants don't really interact, they're not really able to cheat off of each other or be influenced by what the other group is making at any point during the competition. But in this showpiece round, there were some clues clues which Cathy and Thomas didn't notice that led most of the teams to realize they need to make macarons. And at one point, the team next door to theirs is smacking their baking tray against the table in order to get the air bubbles out of their macarons before they go into the oven. And just by virtue of that one sound ringing through the studio, Thomas realizes from the smacking sound exactly what it is that they're making and that his team also needs to start making macarons because clearly the team next to them is getting the air bubbles out.
Is someone making macarons? Someone's making macarons. Can't see the other bakers, we have no idea what they're doing, but I hear someone banging a pan. To me, that only means one thing, and that's French macarons.
I guess I'll get out of your hair. Oh, just one more thing. It's just the darndest thing. You said you were making a Dansez, but I heard some kind of pan smacking on the table just now. Almost sounded like someone getting the air bubbles out of a macaron. It's just these pans, they bother me. Well, I'm sure it's nothing. You have yourself a wonderful Dansez.
It's the only instance I can think of on the show where a contestant actually makes any kind of deduction that helps them out during the actual cooking process, and it's honestly absolutely wonderful. Thomas is the only real detective on the show, and we stan. Team Sociopath, once again, we love to see it. The couple from Tennessee ends up winning their first and only challenge here. The Soup Boys finally get eliminated, and we move on to semis. With 5 teams left, we get a pretty challenging dessert round with all the teams realizing they need to make an opera slice. The episode bills itself as the most dramatic crime scene kitchen episode yet, mostly because Emma ends up kind of struggling with some of the challenges, becoming very visibly overwhelmed and upset, and eventually having a short argument with her mom out of stress and frustration. Luckily, the team of veterans did a far worse job with their opera slice breaking up so much that they end up having to serve it directly on the very unattractive cutting board. The teams then have to make a Mother's Day cake that clearly incorporates some kind of geode design with some interesting looking gem molds. Luis and Natalie, having won the mini challenge, get an extra clue that demonstrates the colors of the gems. The contestants have this chart where different months are labeled with different gemstones, presumably because they have to figure out which gems line up with the month of May. Emma's salted caramel cake starts leaking and she has to build a dam made out of buttercream to prevent it, a process that looks exceptionally stressful. Meanwhile, Cathy and Thomas decide the gem cake is a fault line cake with a gem pattern going around the middle. It seems like Luis and Natalie, with their beautiful cake and extra clue, are going to take this one home, but it turns out the real cake includes a fault line design, which means the best team wins once again. The military veterans, unsurprisingly, do end up going home, and Emma and Leslie are saved from elimination. And then the judges just really keep rubbing in the fact that they almost went home and asking them how it feels that they were almost eliminated, and it's so bizarre. Like, yeah, obviously they're not happy that they were almost eliminated. I don't know what answer they were expecting here.
Emma and Leslie, you just scraped by to the finale.
And finally, it's time for the crime scene kitchen finale. And for some reason, they make the absolutely bizarre choice to just completely drop the premise for the finale. It's interesting because throughout the competition, they were really clear that the primary thing they were prioritizing before things like taste and presentation were the contestants' detective skills. It didn't matter if your dish wasn't very good as long as you accurately guessed what dish you were supposed to make. Similarly, you could make a delicious dish but go home if it was the wrong one. But for the finale, they announced that because the episode is airing on Yolanda Gamp's birthday, the final challenge is just gonna be a birthday cake. And contestants can just do whatever they want with the birthday cake, no detective skill required.
I want you guys to make me a spectacular birthday cake worthy of the $100,000 prize. For the first time this season, you will be designing and baking your very own creations.
It'd be like if in the last episode of The Bachelor, you could just open up Tinder and find someone there. Or like if in the finale of Drag Race, they got rid of the drag element and just made a jury vote on which contestant's personality they liked best. But first, they have the dessert round, which this time is going to be an elimination challenge. And throughout the dessert round, we get these walkarounds exploring some of the contestants' backstories with really emotional music, which is interesting because until now, we knew almost nothing about these people save for a couple of offhanded remarks about their backstories, and the tone of the show has been pretty goofy and irreverent so far. Not Cutthroat Kitchen goofy, but their choice of having Joel McHale be, well, Joel McHale the whole time definitely sets a very specific tone. The finale is therefore a pretty significant departure from the rest of the show for a lot of reasons, as it morphs into a much more generic cooking show narrative. All 4 teams figure out that the dessert round's puff pastry includes cocoa powder somewhere in it, but people weren't entirely sure where, with half the teams making a chocolate sauce and half the teams putting the cocoa directly in the puff pastry. Unfortunately, the puff pastry in the actual dessert is plain, meaning Thomas and Cathy win that challenge and Emma and Leslie are eliminated. The 3 remaining teams going into the final challenge then are Thomas and Cathy, Louise and Natalie, and Lori and Jason. Lori and Jason are definitely the underdogs, having not really gotten a lot of focus from the story up until now, having won only 1 challenge at the very end of the show's run, and not really seeming like viable choices to win the competition. Really, it's between Thomas and Cathy and Louise and Natalie. Like I said, the crime scene element is just not there at all at this point, the show instead leaning in hard on the competition angle as all 3 teams just normally make a birthday cake for Yolanda. There are a couple little elements they have to get right, like the fact that it has to be a tier cake, but the presentation and such is completely up to the teams. The actual cooking process in the final challenge is honestly pretty chill, without any major drama or things going wrong. Even though there's no mystery element left, the teams are still all sequestered off into their own individual kitchens, meaning there aren't really any interesting interactions here to speak of. Louise and Natalie's cake is leaning a little bit, but other than that, the whole thing goes pretty smoothly. It's pretty obvious as soon as judging starts that Lori and Jason are more or less out of the running, their cake immediately being described as not screaming birthday, although Natalie does call their cake sexy for some reason. Thomas and Cathy make a cake that's apparently delicious but also pretty minimalistic, looking classy but not particularly bold. Louise and Natalie's cake finally does have a little bit of lean to it, but is extremely birthday-like and extremely, well, Yolanda, with a surprise sprinkle middle and all kinds of festive pink decorations on top of it. The judges deliberate for a little while, again making it obvious that the competition has come down to the latter 2 teams, and then Joel McHale boots up the confectinator, which will reveal not a dessert, but instead the names of the winning team. After several moments of tension, the Confectinator 3000 reveals via cake topper that Louise and Natalie have been crowned the winners of Crime Scene Kitchen Season 1. Sparklers light, the winning team is happy and excited that they get to give back to their families, and they get a moment of celebration. Then of course the other 2 teams have to give little exit speeches about how it's still very valuable to them that they got to be here, but the credits are rolling while the speeches are going on, which is just very funny to me. The credits just play on top of the sad losing speeches. It's like, all right, you lost, get out of here. And with Louise and Natalie's victory concludes Crime Scene Kitchen. So I don't know if you noticed, but Crime Scene Kitchen is weird. Like, okay, there's this thing I've created called the Saslow's hierarchy of strange cooking shows, and Crime Scene Kitchen places relatively higher on the pyramid, coming in between Cutthroat Kitchen and Dishmantled, the Quibi show hosted by Titus Burgess, where contestants are blindfolded and have to guess via taste the dish that's being shot at them from a cannon. There's a lot here that's weird. For starters, let's look at some of the clues themselves, because theoretically the central idea here is that the contestants are using their baking knowledge and experience to figure out what was recently made in this kitchen, but some of the clues don't really reflect that. Like, remember that moment where the contestants are supposed to look at the words Mother's Day on a piece of paper and use that against a poster of gemstones to figure out what color gems should be on a cake? That isn't anything a normal person would do in a normal baking environment. Like, that's not a normal cooking thing. Or there was one where the kitchen had a coffee cup with the name Jenna on it, and there was like a scrap of paper somewhere in the kitchen with a list of who was bringing what to a potluck, and because Jenna was bringing a coffee cake, they had to realize that this week this was pretending to be Jenna's kitchen, and they themselves thus also had to make a coffee cake. Obscure clues like that don't happen in real life, not unless the person who cooked in that kitchen was some sort of baking criminal mastermind leaving clues behind because they want to be caught. Another issue that arises with the clue system is how the audience feels locked out of what all clues there are. In the show, the teams enter the crime scene one at a time and get 1 minute to look through the kitchen for clues. The editor cuts between all the teams as they do their investigation and point out what they notice. The problem, though, is that we, the audience, don't really get a good understanding of what's in the kitchen using this system. We only really see the kitchen as it exists from the viewpoint of the contestants, and because it's all being cut together and honestly looks pretty choppy a lot of the time, it's hard to keep track of which teams notice what and what all of the clues even are.
Kitchen towel with some crumbs, like a towel used for like jelly roll.
Raspberries, strawberries.
Whipped cream? Whipped cream?
10 seconds left.
Oh, I think I might have an idea.
The only time we really get a rundown on all the clues is at the end, where Curtis goes over everything the contestants should have noticed. This might feel like a nitpick, but it does become a bit of a flaw. Crime Scene Kitchen is, in theory, supposed to be a mystery show. We, the people at home, are theoretically supposed to be trying to figure out the true answer on our own at the same time as the contestants in the show. At the very least, the clues shouldn't be impossibly hard for us to follow. But we don't have a good understanding of what all clues exist and what the supposed crime scene space even really looks like. It's the baking show equivalent of like BBC Sherlock, where the audience isn't let in on all the pieces of evidence, and because of that, the mystery angle falls flat. This could very easily be rectified by just letting the audience see some B-roll footage of the kitchen before the contestants get a chance to enter and mess with it, or even just having little title cards and graphics appear showcasing all of the clues and the evidence that's been found so far. Like I said before, despite how simple the show's rules are, they love to repeat them constantly, over and over again. Like during the judging rounds, Joel, and then eventually Curtis, whenever Joel got tired of doing it, I guess, reminds every contestant that they need to make the right dessert, otherwise they go home, and if they get it right, they keep going. This isn't that complicated of a premise. Do they think that after 2 minutes we'd forget that if you get it wrong, you go home? Another strange thing is how separated the contestants are from each other. I don't just mean in the staging, but I mean on the whole, the contestants just don't get a lot of actual interaction. Which in some ways makes sense, I guess. This is a game all about trying to figure out the dish independently and then working from there, and any fraternizing could jeopardize the integrity of the project. Your teacher wouldn't let you interact with other students during a test, so why should Joel McHale let you interact with other bakers during the crime scene kitchen? But it also just makes the actual competition angle of the show feel kind of non-existent. There's no real tension between players because the players don't know each other. When the two groups of contestants merge in the quarterfinals, it doesn't really mean much because, well, it doesn't actually modify anything about the nature of the competition. The contestants are still sequestered off into their little cubbies doing their little things. There's no real interaction between them. There's not even like a little moment of them meeting each other or anything. The only times we see them together are at the opening and during the judging. There are a couple small moments where they whisper to their teammates or make facial expressions when they see each other's dishes. Most of those moments came from Thomas, if I recall correctly, and they're some of the more enjoyable little moments on the show. It's strange that there aren't more of those. Interpersonal drama is just such an important factor to reality shows, creating a narrative not just for the individual contestant, but between everyone there. Basically, every other cooking show has its contestants close to one another, usually in the same kitchen working around each other. That way, you can potentially see some animosity between them or have them make quips at each other. Even the more relaxed or so-called wholesome shows like Bake Off or, I don't know, MasterChef Junior still have the relationships between the contestants at their forefront in some way. Those shows instead deliberately showcasing the bonds the contestants build with one another. But this just doesn't have either. It feels more like if they decided to have a basketball game where instead of having the two teams on the field at the same time, both teams just take turns shooting hoops and then you compare the scores at the end. Does it work? Sure. Is it as interesting as it could have been? Not at all. That's sort of why it's placed where it is in the Saslow's hierarchy chart. Theoretically speaking, Crime Scene Kitchen should be weirder than it actually is, right? Like, here you are combining the basics of a cooking competition with the framework of a murder scene, and yet there really isn't anything that takes advantage of the investigation angle. Contestants have to go through and figure out the clues in the kitchen, sure, but the kitchen isn't actually set up in a way that resembles either an actually used kitchen or a crime scene. Clues are placed too deliberately deliberately, the set's too neat with the aforementioned little obscure clues you're supposed to find. I don't know, I'm imagining a version where like there's a tier cake and they like sprayed it with like raspberry sauce and you had to like tell from the patterns of the spatter like how tall the cake was because there's like a blockage there. I don't know, I feel like that'd be a crimey way to do it. The whole crime scene angle feels very shoehorned in. When you think of crime scenes, you think gore and darkness and disturbing imagery and police tape and mess and clutter, and that just isn't here. It tries to mimic it sometimes, sure. At the end of each round, when the judges reveal all the actual clues, we get these dramatic shots designed to resemble the sort of thing you'd see in Hannibal. But that energy isn't carried throughout the rest of the show. The closest I'd say it gets is the chamber that the kitchen is in looks like the sort of thing you'd hold Magneto in. Otherwise, it's just a cooking show in a gargantuan metallic set. What's weird is that the marketing is totally on board to present this as a crime time show. You have these trailers with these messy, darkly lit kitchens, including one graded in black and white and narrated like a noir film.
The evidence was obvious. Spilled milk, greasy tins, flour sprayed across the room.
If you check their Instagram or other social media, you see these graphics showcasing clues and case files. It's not like actually intense or anything, but it gives off the imagery of intensity in a way that's fun, much like a murder mystery game night. So it's clear that the show has some desire to embrace the crime scene angle, but for some reason the energy in the marketing just didn't translate to the actual program itself. I sort of wish they had just really gone all in on this, you know? Like, really just played with the premise and had fun with it. I mean, it's called a crime scene. Where's the raspberry sauce blood? Where's the dark humor? Where's my dead body, Joel McHale? I want to see a dead body on Crime Scene Kitchen, Joel. You know what show did have fun with its premise? Dishmantled. Remember the one I mentioned about a Quibi or so ago where blindfolded contestants have to make a dish based on food shot at them from a cannon? It's really interesting to compare the two shows, honestly. A few reviewers who've covered Crime Scene Kitchen have noticed the similarities, like Andy Denart writing for Reality Blurred and Danielle Terciano writing for Variety. And despite the massive variations in tone and runtime between the shows, I can see where they're coming from. Both rely on the contestants having to guess a dish and then make it gimmick, and both are hosted by a famous TV comedian, and it's hard to tell which of the shows did this better because it all just sort of depends on what you're really looking for. Dishmantled leans into its premise more and really gets why people are watching. They always focus really, really hard on the culinary money shot. The judges all sit back and drink wine and shoot the shit, clearly not taking any of this seriously. They even have the contestants in the same room as each other, cooking around one another so you can get some of that interpersonal drama between the chefs. I mean, theoretically, this is still a Quibi show, so Dishmantled has to squeeze all of this into a 6-minute time frame. So we don't really get anything resembling any personality or story to any of the contestants, nor do we get to see much of them. It's hard to know who we're even supposed to root for because we don't really get any information about their backstory or personality or really anything beyond what they look like.
My name is Lee Noble. I'm gonna win because I have a great palate and I will eat anything.
My name is Allison Fasano. With the $5,000, I'm gonna buy tickets to see Celine Dion, duh.
Dishmantled, despite being shorter and more fun, is also just more annoying, obnoxious. It feels like a fake TV show you'd see a character flip to in Sorry to Bother You.
Oh my God.
Crime Scene Kitchen, on the other hand, is much more normal and subdued, for better or for worse. While we don't get a lot of interactions between contestants, we do get to follow them, meaning you can actually get a taste for their personality and grow attached. It could benefit more from playing into its main gimmick and by being more relaxed the same way that Dishmantled was. And sometimes it feels like it's heading in that direction, especially whenever they let Joel here for a paycheck McHale shout quips, but it's just not enough. They really need to play into their gimmick more and figure out what exactly it is that Crime Scene Kitchen, well, is. Is it a serious baking show, a cooking show with a crime investigation gimmick, or is it a relaxed thing where people can be chill and take the piss? I'm not sure what the proper way forward is or what the best direction to go in would be. Except I do, actually. More camp, please. Please, more camp. Something that was going through my mind the whole time I was watching Crime Scene Kitchen was why? Like, why did they make the show like this? Why go for the crime scene angle? Especially if you're not gonna, actually do crime scenes. This isn't really something I can confirm on my own. I mean, the show is still new, and it isn't something people are doing a lot of reporting on, so it's not like I can just pull out an interview and get the definitive answer for how this show was created. And I could submit questions directly to the show's producers to see if I could get some answers there, but I mean, why would a serious production company answer an email from some random YouTuber desperate to know the naming origins of the Confectinator 3000? So I guess what I have to do is take a bunch of what I can find and what I've seen, little scraps of evidence and clues, and hope that it leads me to a proper conclusion. My first hypothesis is that the crime scene angle was added solely to capitalize on the popularity of true crime stories and police procedurals. True crime has become big, especially online, and police procedurals are network television's bread and butter. So taking that and combining it with actual bread and butter that you'd use for baking, and it seems like you'd have something that seems perfectly fit to satisfy a large demographic. This could very well be possible. So mystery solved, right? I guess I can go ahead and end this video. But just one more thing. I noticed something in the background of one of the clips. That camera person with a large camera on their shoulder that's probably hurting their back. What's that they have on their face? Oh, that's right, a mask. And then it all hit me. This was made during COVID times, and everything sort of sunk into place. I'm not sure exactly when this was filmed. The show was formally announced on April 7th, 2021. Whether they already had everything shot beforehand or did so in the month and a half until the premiere is unclear. Regardless, if you haven't noticed, we are very much in a pandemic. And while things are getting better in some parts of the world as vaccinations increase, there's still a large issue of how to create content in these conditions, especially on productions that require larger crews. And this is a problem because, well, networks need things to play on television. They can't just have a dead slot. They need content, which means they need to find ways to make content. And enter the crime scene kitchen. That's why the contestants are separated from each other. That's why everyone gets their own personal kitchen. That's why they explore the crime scene one group at a time. You could even argue it's the reason why they have the contestants wearing gloves when they go in to investigate. It's the easiest way to keep the place sanitized, especially considering how up close and personal people get there. This could all be incidental, but it adds up. Every piece of this show feels carefully designed to adhere to COVID regulations, perfectly sculpted and crafted to minimize spread as much as you possibly can while still doing a cooking show. This doesn't necessarily explain why they didn't, do actual crime scene stuff on the show called Crime Scene Kitchen, but it can potentially explain how they arrived at the idea to keep everyone separated like this, and how that played into the strange, bizarre, yet weirdly normal show that we currently have and love today. This would be the point in the video where I wrap everything up and tie it back into some grand thesis statement that says something about the world or society or whatever, when we realize this dumb media thing we were talking about has actual applications we can use to better our understanding of the world around us and how we approach life. I would say something about how Crime Scene Kitchen showcases the struggles of network TV to fill content blocks, and possibly how it reflects the harsh adaptations we have to make to do a production in these unprecedented times of COVID. How the challenges of COVID essentially contradict with the capitalist demand for more and more content at any cost, and the kinds of adaptations that need to exist for us to do that. How the existence of reality television kind of inherently reflects an exploitative, artificially constructed reality very carefully orchestrated by producers and editors to hide their own existence rather than any organic sincerity. But at the end of the day, the real important thing here is that I found a show I wanted to talk about, and I talked about it. Crime Scene Kitchen isn't the weirdest show out there, nor the most seemingly malicious. It's a television show that reflects the dishes its contestants are baking. It's a fluffy dessert, meant to be consumed absent-mindedly and without much worry at the end of the day. There are certain things I want to see done better should this ever progress into a season 2. I want to see what this show could look like if they just let it go off the rails. Go all in on the crime angle, let the contestants have fun with each other, decide if this is supposed to be a stressful competition or a light-hearted romp. Cooking shows don't necessarily need to have gimmicks and don't need to go all in. In reality, I'm not sure if I learned anything about baking from watching Crime Scene Kitchen beyond how to identify if someone is making macarons on the other side of the wall. But the joy in these gimmicky, kitschy cooking shows is getting to experience something seemingly conventional like baking through the lens of sheer buck-wild madness. If that madness was channeled and honed in on, Crime Scene Kitchen could grow to be a legitimately really fun show. It just needs to flesh out its premise and figure out how it can change in order to get the most out of its hosts and its subjects. Whether or not this is the end of Crime Scene Kitchen's story, I don't know. From what I can tell, its ratings aren't that amazing, and if the show does exist to be COVID content filler, then the network might not feel the push to renew it. Regardless of whether or not it continues, I can definitely say that it did what it needed to, which was to provide a weird, bizarre thing to get invested in for a few weeks. And for that, well, I'll say it was worth it. Also, Thomas, you're great. I'm sorry we called you and your mom sociopaths. I hope you're happily baking with batter made from the blood of your enemies. One thing I really love is storytelling, and you can see it pretty much anywhere from standard novels to the narratives we can find in the weirdest reality cooking shows. Personally, I love writing and storytelling, whether it's creating D&D characters or keeping track of my own stories. That's why I'm really excited about Campfire Blaze, an incredibly cool application and my sponsor for this video. Essentially, Campfire Blaze is a browser-based writing application that lets you keep track of story elements. It's essentially made up of a ton of different modules like characters and world building that let you do things like make relationship webs to keep track of how characters relate to each other, or modules to keep track of maps or magic systems or religions in your world. I really love using it because it comes with tons of different themes to fit the vibe of whatever it is you're writing, like fantasy or western or sci-fi, all the way to things like romance and horror. Campfire Blaze also receives new features every month, plus it's completely free to use for smaller projects. If you do need more space, you only have to pay for the specific features you need for as little as 50 cents. They also have a 30-day return policy if you're not satisfied. Personally speaking though, I really love Campfire Blaze. What I've been using it for since getting it is actually my Sims soap opera that I've been running on Twitter. So if you've enjoyed that, you can thank Campfire Blaze. If you want to learn more, just click the link in my description. You can use my code SZ21 or SZ21, depends on how you say it, and receive 20% all lifetime purchases of Blaze modules for all of 2021. On top of a big thank you to all my patrons, I'd like to specially thank Tara Liederman, Rhythm, Hawks Rocks, Ender Cobra, and Brian Geffrich. Thank you so much and welcome.